Hi, I'm the Reverend Raleigh Weaver, and this is the First Church and Parish in Dedham, and I am in Wells, Vermont on Lake St. Catherine, wishing you a happy 4th of July. I'm glad to be together to worship together. This sermon from today is the very first sermon I ever wrote in seminary, and I hope you enjoy it. It's been rebooted for today. We begin with our centering thought. Faith is not something to grasp, it is a state to grow into. Mahatma Gandhi. And we begin with our prelude, Demande by Alexander Gretchenoff, played by Derry Dolezal. Our welcome and announcements. Today, I'd like to remind you that we are pretty much on summer vacation. Grace will be working on Wednesdays during the farmers market. There'll be social distancing, but having the farmers market every week. And if you happen by the church during a AA meeting, you might see a bunch of people in the back parking lot, but don't be concerned. They are also social distancing. We will not be returning to regular worship until September, till the second week in September, and we will let you know if that's going to go forward because it's hard to predict right now. In the meantime, over the summer, there are 2 opportunities to get together still, 3 really. We have Zoom social hour following this service, and I hope you'll join us. The link is always the same. It's on our website, and it's on the All Church email. Also, we have a daily meditation from 9 to 9:25, and you're always welcome to join me for that. And we have a Dismantling White Supremacy book group that's started. We're reading Carol Anderson's White Rage right now. And if you'd like to join us for that, we're going to meet again on July 15th, and we will announce the next book to start on August 1st. So I hope you'll consider joining us for any of those things. It's nice to get together even virtually during these times, and I wish you again a happy 4th of July. We will now hear A Fierce Unrest by Anasis Davinisis, a Kentucky harmony written in 1815, and the lyrics to this introit are a fierce unrest seized at the core of all existing things, played by Derry Dolezal. Our opening words this morning are Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I light our chalice this morning in celebration of all our religious diversity of beliefs and understandings. And I light our green sanctuary candle in celebration of all the ways we try to be a more sustainable congregation. I invite you now to sing with me hymn number 287 in your gray hymnal, hymn number 287, Faith of a Larger Liberty. Please say with me your unison affirmation that is printed in your order of worship. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, to serve humanity in love is our covenant with each other and with God. I'm going to ring this bell to bring you into this space while we have our intergenerational message. Today I just want to talk to you a little bit about what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. We talk a lot about our principles and purposes with our children, but we don't often talk about our sources and traditions. And Unitarians believed in the unity of God, and Universalists believed in universal salvation, which basically means that they believe that Jesus already came to life to save our sins, and we should be welcoming the kingdom of God on earth and making the world a better place. In the 1960s, we became one congregation when the Unitarians and the Universalists merged in 1961. And then we adopted a bunch of humanistic principles, which basically means that all religions, we believe, have a piece of the truth. And when you think about all religions, you think about Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism, but we also believe that humanism and paganism and atheism all have a truth to tell, and that we can support and sustain that. So today I'm drawing a great deal from the Christian tradition, and that's because I went to a Christian seminary and I also grew up Christian. But if you think about it, our whole society was based on a Christian idea. Our dollar sign, a dollar say, "In God we trust." And even when we we go into a court of law, or when the president is sworn into office, he puts his hand on a Bible. And so we do have a very strong foundation in a Christian ideal. But that doesn't mean Christianity is the only religion or that it has the only truth. We believe that all religions together start to point a little bit more towards the truth. So I just want you to think about that as we go through our worship today, and I read from the Bible a little bit more than I usually do. Now, our first reading is actually from the book of John. John 10, verses 1 through 10. The Good Shepherd and his sheep. Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used to use this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. And therefore, Jesus said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy, and I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I invite you into a time of prayer or meditation, as is your practice. We start by breathing in peace and breathing out love. Breathing in peace and breathing out love. Let us be grateful for all the silences in our lives, for with them we may more completely experience sound. And now we'll hear our anthem, Minuet in D minor by J.S. Bach, played by Derry Dolezal. Our second reading this morning is also from the Christian Scriptures, 1 Peter, chapter 2, verses 19 through 25. This is from the Revised Standard Version. For one is approved if, mindful of God, he endures pain while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if when you do wrong you are beaten and take it patiently? But if when you do right and suffer for it, you take it patiently, you have God's approval. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, no guile was found on his lips. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he trusted to them who judged him justly. He himself bore out our sins in his body and on the tree, that we might die to sin and live in righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed, for you were straying like sheep, but now have returned to the shepherd, the guardian of your souls. I invite you to join with me in singing hymn number 194 in the gray hymnal and also in your order of service, Faith is a Forest, 194. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. How many times have you heard that psalm? That is a sort of rhetorical question because I don't think I could recount how many times I have heard it. The lines of Psalm 23 are ingrained in my memory, also because I have recited it at many landmark events in my life. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Once when I was 11 years old, I was caught between an electric fence and a ferociously barking dog, and I remember comforting myself with the words, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me." And when my mother was dying of breast cancer, I remember reciting these words to soothe and to comfort her. But as I recite these words today, I wonder what is so special about them. What power do these words hold to soothe and to comfort me? And are they true? If I sit with them long enough, I'm not really sure I like what these words are saying. If the Lord is my shepherd, does this mean I have to be a sheep? In our culture, sheep are often portrayed as having little mind of their own. That doesn't describe me. I'm independent. I'm a leader, not a blind follower. I don't want to be lorded over. I'm no sheep. And yet the image of Lord as my shepherd brings me comfort. This is in part because I experience some tension between the idea of a Lord and a shepherd. In my mind, the Lord is someone who watches over the village from a distance, separate. The Lord lives in a big house, on a hill, far away, in a higher place. In contrast, the shepherd is not some distant figure. This that is lording over the sheep from afar. Instead, the shepherd gets in close. The shepherd gets dirty. The shepherd is close enough to notice if the sheep is sick or missing. The shepherd stays close enough to care for the sheep. Being a suburbanite for the last 13 years, I don't see a lot of shepherds walking around. I spend more time with dogs. So when I hear these messages about shepherds, I cannot help but thinking of dogs. When I take my dogs for a walk, it has to be on a leash. And from my end of the leash, I get the dog where I want it to go by sometimes being pulled and sometimes pulling the dog to the right places. Naturally, this is how I imagine God. God, the dog walker, with us at the end of the leash of God. The dog walker dragging us around and chasing us and pulling us to right paths. To be honest, that seems sort of painful. In contrast, when I'm in the woods in Vermont, I can let my dogs off the leash. They go where they want, and I call them back from time to keep them on track. This, I believe, is more what a shepherd does. Shepherds do not push or pull their sheep. Instead, shepherds are in a working relationship with their sheep. A shepherd guides the sheep using a rod and a staff, not to hit or corral, but to urge, to guide, to facilitate the sheep to right pathways. The view of God as a shepherd shows up nearly 80 times in the Christian scriptures and the Jewish and the Hebrew scriptures. The Hebrew word for shepherd comes from the verb to pasture or to tend. In Exodus, Moses was considered the shepherd leading Israel out of Egypt. And in 1 Samuel, David is also called a shepherd in his role as king of Israel. The life of a shepherd in biblical times was considered good training for someone who would later lead God's people. Imagine how different the 4th of July might have been in Washington, D.C. if our current president thought of his role as a shepherd instead of an enforcer or commander-in-chief. With all the shepherd imagery in the Hebrew scriptures, is it any surprise that we find the references in the Christian Bible describing Jesus as the shepherd? In the passage from John we read from today, we heard two more ideas of Jesus' relationship to sheep. At the start, it is clear that he is comparing his form of leadership to other teachers and leaders. Truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice and call his sheep by name. In the passage from John we read from today, we heard two more ideas of Jesus in his relationship to the sheep. At the start, it is clear that he is comparing his form of leadership to other teachers and leaders. Truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls the sheep by name. Jesus is not only talking about the nature of God, but also appears to be instructing the Pharisees about how to be good leaders. In this description, Jesus seems to be describing the Pharisees as thieves and robbers and bandits by manipulating their way into leadership. Jesus describes himself as the good shepherd because he does not force or steal the sheep, but leads them because they know his voice. The difference between shepherds who go through the right doors and channels versus one who manipulates situations to get in the door by an alternative way, to my mind, is a clear litmus test for good leadership. It might be helpful to realize that the Pharisees were separatists, the religious class debunking the status quo. Their name comes from the Hebrew Aramaic parush or parushi, which literally means one who is separated. The Pharisees were more connected to the common people than the Sadducees, who were more connected to the ruling class. We religious liberals would be more aligned with the Pharisees, so it is clear that this instruction is for people like us. The narrator of John tells us that the Pharisees do not understand Jesus, and so he restates his metaphor. In the second half of the passage, Jesus then represents himself as the gate for the sheep. As the gate, Jesus neither forces the sheep, but instead provides the structure for the sheep to go in and out. A gate and the door give us direction as well as freedom to come and go. In the same way I call my dogs back to me when we walk in the woods, I am able to give them structure and freedom at the same time. In this way, Jesus describes a God who does not drag or pull or force us to faith, but instead calls us to believe and then free us to come. I know this pull to God is strongest to me when I'm hurt or lost. For my birthday this year, Jenny and the girls and I went camping in Maine. We had many mishaps and adventures. For example, on the last hike, Jenny and I got separated, and I got turned around and walked nearly a mile back away from the car. She went back up the path to find me, and while I circled back to the car and we missed each other, I know that both of us were worried and thinking that the other one of us had fallen and gotten hurt. I searched as much as I felt safe, and without a cell phone coverage or car keys, all I could do was sit on the ground near the car and pray. And it wasn't long before Jenny and Suki and Lula crested the hill near the car. I bring this up because in the extreme circumstances, there is little we can do to force or to push an outcome. All we can do is be patient. And sometimes prayer helps with that. Our final passage from 1 Peter describes the human condition as being like that of the sheep who had gone astray, but have now returned to the shepherd as the guardian of their souls. In this letter, Peter, we are told, that it is through Jesus' suffering patiently for something he didn't do that we are made free. He goes on to say that it is through suffering unjust punishments patiently that we gain God's approval. I have had a hard time understanding this passage all my life. The whole idea that the meek inherit the earth makes little sense in the face of real injustice and wrongdoing. Or does it? A few years ago, I received a letter from Jack, who I sometimes correspond with on death row in San Quentin. Jack is nearly 40 years old now, has been in prison since he was 18 years old. Like many black men in prison today, Jack was arrested for a crime he did not commit. 2 of the officers involved in his case have been charged with ethical misconduct, and yet Jack still remains on death row. What surprised me about Jack from the first moment I met him is that although he recognizes the unjustness of his situation, he does not appear to hold any resentment about his imprisonment. When I wrote to Jack, I asked him how he felt about a recent execution, and he responded to me and explained this passage in 1 Peter better than any commentary or by a religious scholar or theologian I have ever read. Here's what Jack wrote. None of these executions get easier to sit through. They take you through the execution step by step, minute by minute. It is like we are walking through each execution right along with the man. You know exactly when they put the needle in and the exact moment that he's gone. It is not right for him or them or us. They have to realize that the threat of death doesn't scare people. 25 to life and life without is what they fear. While there are people who thrive in prison, the great majority slowly deteriorate. Think about waking up every single morning and it feels like deja vu. I mean, every day you eat the same, every day, day in and day out, the same routine. Each week has its own routine. Every day, everything that you do is the same. Life gets bad when you start to notice that every day is like deja vu. You get tired of being tired. That is what hard time is. The only thing that holds a person together is hope. Hope is only as strong for those with cases like mine. If you are innocent, then you know that this isn't the last stop. Those without hope are constantly searching for something to replace it. Some seek religion, some seek a cause. Most seek goodness of people to remind them that behind these walls isn't the only world there is. For me, I'm thankful that my mind is whole and who I am has not yet been compromised. I believe that there is a lot more for me after this place. I refuse to fall apart before I can see what's out there. Some people call it being strong. I just think I'm stubborn. Both the letter to Paul and Jack's letter to me point to the incredible power of holding close to the light of what is good and right, and how doing so can lead us out of darkness far better than any vitriol or rant could ever do. This can be a blind spot for us UUs, whose tradition does not focus on our connection to a benevolent higher power that will lead us back to right paths in times of trouble. Holding tightly to faith or values higher and better than the circumstances in front of you can help you to keep going in the most extreme times. Jack could not survive his circumstances if he did not choose to focus on hope and possibility instead of suffering. Hope and faith can sustain us in difficult times, but we must choose to take them with us. God or the divine or the spirit of life that lives and moves within each of us, with it, we have to remember to take it with us in every moment, at birth and death, and even in every everyday moment in between. When we are trapped between a fence and a barking dog, when a loved one is dying, when we get lost from our family or are stuck in a jail cell, whatever you call God is there with you. If you allow that benevolent higher power in your life, it can guide you to right paths and help you on your way. I recognize that this sermon may be too Christian for some of you, especially you died in the world you use. It is, after all, a modification of the first sermon I ever wrote in seminary, and as I went to a Christian seminary, it was meant for that audience. Still, even in a more humanistic context, to strive for justice with out an eye to the higher good or purpose that will keep you accountable to what is good and right is sort of like entering by another door than even our Declaration of Independence or U.S. Constitution or 7 UU principles would ascribe. Believe in God or not, if the highest good you imagine are the values of life, your values of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then those values can become a gateway or measuring stick by which all human purposes can digress or align. In light of our American 4th of July celebrations, let us consider that holding to faith in all that is good and right in life, especially during extreme times, is our birthright as a nation founded on a rejection of tyranny. Let us remember that no matter how dark it gets, there is always light. Light of a higher truth and a higher good that is always calling us home. I invite you now to sing with me hymn number 108 in your gray hymnal, My Life Goes On in Endless Song. Fix, O Lord, our steps, so we stagger not in the uneven motions of this world, but go steadily on our way, neither censuring our journeys by the weather we meet or turning aside from anything that might befall us. Amen. And please join us for Zoom coffee hour. See you soon. Endless song, above verse lamentations, I hear a real though far off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. When it sounds an echo in my soul, how